Welcome back. We are live. Okay, so this was mine that I wrote out a little bit at a time, right? Just to go over it, we've got our class, movies, extends, our component, we've got our state pointing to movies, empty array, makes sense. Component dim mount, we have to go out and fetch all those movies, right? We want to do that right when the page mounts. We've got to fetch movies, takes in a URL. It waits for the data. Once it gets it, it sets the movies to that data. Otherwise, it just sets it to be empty. And then I didn't finish, so I'll just make a quick const movies, and I'll say this.state.movies.map. Bless you. And for each movie, let's go ahead and just return an li. I got to give it a key. And so that will just be movie.id. And in here, I'll just say the movie title, right? Nothing fancy, just so I have something to show. And in here, I'll go ahead and call my variable movies. Okay? Any questions on just this class component in general? Okay, yep. Yeah. I haven't had corn nuts for like years.
What? You don't know what you're missing.
I like to be percussive when I eat. I wish I had a mic. Okay. Okay, so we've got this. I've already added this to our app, so I have the route already for when I go to /movies. I don't think I need to show that. I can if you need me to. But we just get all of our movies. Okay, let's convert this into hooks. Shall we? So, what's the first thing I should do? Yeah. What?
Change the class to a function of number.
Sure, let's make it a const. Let's go ahead and just turn this into a function. Okay, cool. What's next? Let's just go line by line. What's the next thing I should look at?
You don't need to stay.
I do need a state, right? So let's go ahead and bring in use state. And let's go ahead and do that. So we'll say const. Const is the preferred thing instead of let. Use const. Let will work, but const is more or less the standard there. And so we can say this is going to be called movies. So what should this be called? Set movies. Right. That's the convention. And we'll say use state. What's my initial state?
Empty array.
Empty array, right? So just like how it was before. All right. No extra lines here. So, component did mount. Ugh.
Use effect.
Use effect. Because we need to do some sort of side effect. So let's go ahead and import use effect from React. Use effect is kind of interesting. It does because it does a few different things. So we'll explain what those do in a minute. I'm gonna go ahead and go like this. Okay, so use effect, how this is written. Use effect, invoke it. Use effect takes in a callback. So I'm just gonna make this an anonymous function. Oops. Like that. You can't have an asynchronous function as that callback.
You said, huh?
So I cannot write
Async.
async.
Wow.
It's a little annoying, but you can't do it yet. They just don't have that. They will eventually, probably. But what we can do is make functions inside of useEffect. So I could take this function we already have, call it const, and I have my async function here, so I don't really have to change much. Okay. Instead of set state, what do I have? Sorry? Right, we have set movies. So set movies, and this takes in the new state of that. So now it's just set movies for us got data. And we can say the same thing for here. So I'll go ahead and just say set movies. Make that an empty array. Okay, not so bad. And we gotta call fetch movies still, right? Because that's the whole purpose. So I'm gonna take, fetch movies. And put it right there. So now I can get rid of my component did mount. So there's so many things I want to tell you, but the first thing to think about when you're thinking, why is useEffect so much better than component did mount, component did update, component will unmount? Anybody have any ideas of why it's more user friendly? It's okay if you don't, but if you do, take a shot. Yeah, there's a lot of repetitious code in those, right? This isn't the ideal example for that, but remember in the clock when we made the clock, we had our component did mount where we set up this listener, or in that example it was a set timeout or a set interval, and then in the component will unmount, we went ahead and removed that, right? So there's that cleanup phase. So this is like in a lot of apps. In a lot of class components, you have this did mount where you set a bunch of things up, and then your component will unmount, you have to clean up all of those things. Also, there is different things. There's only one component did mount, right? There's only one. So you can have a call to go get posts, you could have a listener to set something on the window, and you could set an interval, right? You could do these three things that are completely not connected in the same function. Well, that's hard to understand. That's hard to debug, that's hard to understand, that's harder to test. Right? That's a negative. We want our functions to be doing one thing, be responsible for one thing. So we can have multiple use effects, just like we have multiple use states. So if I wanted to add a listener for the screen size or something, I would put that in its own use effect.
So,
Yeah.
So with component did mount, it automatically, if the component mounted, it automatically did whatever you put inside the component did mount. So with use effects, how does that?
Well, I could add another use effect.
Does it automatically do that when the component mounts? Or
So, good question. So when does use effect get called? Use effect gets called when the component mounts, whenever there's a change in state or props. What function does that remind you of? Anything, every time the component has a change of state or props? Component did update. And then it runs again right before the component unmounts. And there's ways to trigger each thing. So we don't want to make this Axios call every time we change the state, right? Because then what's going to happen? We're going to be in an infinite loop, right? Because it's going to update the state, and then it's going to cause a re-render, which is going to cause it to call useEffect, and we're going to get hooked. So useEffect does take in a second argument. So it takes in the callback, and then it takes in a second argument. Don't get too annoyed by this. So if you just want this to run one time, you put an empty array. Maybe you have. Maybe you look at a hook. One empty array at the end means run this one time. It's empty. This array is used as an array of dependencies. That is the word. Dependencies. So if there was a series of props that I wanted to look at, like in our component did update the other day when we wanted to see if the new dog breed was the same as the old dog breed, in that example, I would write breed, because I would only want to run this effect every time there's a change in the breed. It's given to us. If it's empty, it's a component did mount. If we don't remember all of these perfectly right now, that's okay. We'll see them again and again. Remember this. useEffect takes in a callback and a second possible argument. If you don't put anything in it, it runs a mount, update, and will unmount. If you put an empty array, it will run in component did mount. All right. Because we're not what? Con, can you be a little quieter?
Yeah, we can have it just run once for what we're doing now, because we're not really selecting anything.
Right. Well, we don't care if there's any updates. There's nothing we're tracking, and because there's nothing we're tracking, we give it an empty array. So there's a lot of side conversations. If you have questions, just go ahead and ask. Otherwise, you're missing explanations to different questions. We will learn about component will unmount, but we don't need to do that right now. Essentially, this can return another function that will run when it's time to unmount. Okay, so we've got our useEffect there. Our empty array means component did mount, so just once. Then we can get rid of our render, right? We no longer need those. Get rid of that. Everything should be tabbed over one. We already have, we no longer should call this const movies because we already have a movies. So let me just call this like movie display. And this would be movies.map. Get rid of this .state. There is no longer this .state. And this would just be movies display. All right, so our functional components will get a little bigger because now they have state. But
Wait,
you see it still works the same.
hold on.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the UL?
Put it right there.
Oh,
Okay, so what does use state return?
use state
Mm-hmm.
an array.
An array. Okay, someone else tell me what the first item in that array is. Someone I haven't heard from. Brandon? Yep, the value of that piece of state, perfect. And what's the second item in that array? Yeah, Kevin? All right, pass to Brandon. Yeah, that's right. It's a function to update that value in the state. Perfect. All right, so we can name them nicely right here. Use effect. Who can tell me what use effect does? Marvin?
Use effect, it takes some function and, it's sort of, I think of it as a more flexible way to define it now. Thanks because you're able to, you can sort of use the, you can actually just use the effects of the functions.
Okay, yeah, it replicates the behaviors of our life cycle methods. Component did mount, component did update, and component will unmount.
Life cycle.
Yeah.
And it takes an also set agreement, which has dependencies, and if you leave it with one array, it component mount, it uses those. If not, if you put in one specific thing, it only fires when that is like only fires when there's a change in agreement, which changes that.
Yep, that's right. This is an array of dependencies, this sort of dependency array. Because it's empty, there's nothing that it's looking to follow, so therefore there's nothing for it to change and update for. If we had to have things, it would look for those specific things. Okay. Yes. What's that? Sure.
You said the use effect takes it into argument for what?
Callback.
The previous thing, or to callback?
It's just a callback. And then inside of that callback is where we would set up whatever we need to do. So that's a good place for listeners and all that. All right, so these are our main. This is our main things. So let's go ahead and we wrote a clock, right? Do we remember writing this clock? Okay, so for the next 15 minutes, let's try our hand at updating this to use hooks. All right? Go for it.